So I have a sermon for you. I gave this in February of 2023. It's based on Luke chapter 2, Jesus being presented at the temple. And it's about how we interact with temples and churches, how we used to, how we think we do, and kind of where society and church members are going with this new world that we're in. How are we going to present ourselves at the temple in the future? Might be a good way to think of it. I used also, including Luke chapter 2, I used this book here. There's a first thing you'll hear is a poem from this book by Denise Levertov, The Stream and the Sapphire. I highly recommend the book and the poem. And, I hope that this helps in some ways for anyone who's thinking about houses of worship and what's going to happen to them, what's going to happen to us as congregations in the future. So without further ado, here we go.
With certitude, Simeon opened ancient arms to infant light, decades before the cross, the tomb, and the new life. With certitude, Simeon opened ancient arms to infant light. So it turns out that human beings haven't changed all that much over the centuries. For we find our inspiration both inside and outside the temple of tradition. Now, in our reading today, which we don't read very often, and maybe we should, because what do we think of in the New Testament and the temple? We think of Jesus turning over all the tables. But in our reading today, we see something different. Mary and Joseph take Jesus to the temple in Jerusalem. This is Luke chapter 2. This is very early. Takes Jesus to the temple in Jerusalem, the holiest of holy places in their world. And they took him there for traditional reasons, for the rituals of purification for Mary and circumcision for Jesus, offering, maybe you caught this, 2 turtle doves, just like the Christmas carol, as tradition required. But before they could do that, Simeon and Anna, important religious figures in their own right, but folk prophets, if you will, do a bit of an end run around the religious authorities and provide their own blessings for the child. Then Mary and Joseph thank them, but still head inside to make it official. In spite of all that they had witnessed up to this point in the Bible, all those angels, Zechariah being struck mute, the star in the sky summoning the Magi, the shepherds' amazing stories, even the presence of these 2 freelancers on the temple grounds, in spite of all of this, of all the assurances that their child was indeed unique and special, they still swung in to get the blessing done by the priests on duty. Maybe cousin Zechariah himself was on duty that day. We don't know. Before heading back to Nazareth. Now, this phenomenon still happens from time to time, even in our small, low Protestant church. We get inquiries for weddings. We get requests for baptisms and child dedications too. Memorial services, both here and by the grave, from good people who do not claim to believe whatever it is that they perceive us as believing. Now, they're usually wrong about what we believe, about what we stand for. But these good people don't really care all that much anyway. Because they are not looking for community from us in the long term. They are not looking for community. However, they are looking for something. They are looking for meaning. And they are looking for meaning right here, in the one specific instance that brought them to us. The specific instance of birth or death or marriage, in a place that tradition has set aside for finding that meaning. They are not seeking a church. They're certainly not seeking a congregation. But they are seeking a temple. A temple. Now these days we get fewer of those people. But the urge is still out there. There is something in the human mind that seeks a place with sacred connection. Sometimes, as we have discussed before, that place is out there in the world somewhere, but sometimes it is right here, where we still gather on the morning of the Sabbath day. You see, the thing that congregations, regardless of their traditions, still do best, better than anyone else, the thing that we do best is create a ritual landscape that carries meaning on a communal rather than an individual level. A communal, a community level rather than an individual one. And this is what the temple seekers who visit us are looking for in that moment. Because when human beings are seeking a place to gather in community, in their community, whatever that may mean for them, for the spiritual work of community, of formally witnessing life's passages, people are drawn back to the temple that our congregation inhabits and maintains for at least that one moment. Now, at the very beginning of this service, I read a passage from the Presbyterian minister Richard Dietrich. How do we express reverence, he asks. Then he answers, we create communal responses in order to offer our awe. We create rituals around the seasons of the year, around the seasons of life, birth, coming of age, growing old, dying. We create things, he concludes, and then we are loyal to them. We create things, and then we are loyal to them. And so people still get married in and buried out of churches, synagogues, and mosques. Places created by their predecessors. They dedicate their children in these places too, even if they are not entirely sure what they are dedicating them to. Now they also receive, as all people do, the meaningful and unconventional blessings of family and self-appointed prophets. And in-house, in our congregation, we offer a lot of those blessings ourselves to each other. After all, if Simeon and Anna were alive today, they would be part of some kind of congregation. All of this means that the urge to worship more formally still exists. And it means a full house on Christmas Eve. But what we are doing right now, regular Sunday morning worship, doesn't have the draw it used to. And the problem, I think, is that for consistent participation and communal belonging as human beings, we need to see ourselves, our lives, our understanding of the world in the Sabbath moments. In both the old ways and the new. And this is where we have a problem of perception in the church, and really in any religious tradition. For a while, as the Eliot Church, we do see ourselves in both worlds. I think it's safe to say that in certain quarters of society, what we do on Sunday morning can be considered a bit unfashionable, unproductive, and quaint. Now, of course, we know this, for we also spend most of our time living in the present, with its pressures, needs, and biases. And this old stuff from the past that looks toward the future can feel like a waste of time. But there isn't some temple need on the horizon. Why, after all, would a rational human being want to sit in a room for an hour to sing hymns, to hear some poetry, and then to listen to somebody go off about it for 15 minutes? We do not receive any gifts of productivity in that time by being here. The era of the church as a networking site is long gone. And there are more convenient ways to hang out with each other. We know this because we do them. But most of us here today do just this thing regularly. And we miss it when we can't. So we know that the answer to these questions is in the question itself. We are drawn to the hymns and the prayers and the poetry. We even appreciate that perceived inconvenience, which pulls us out of the rat race to set our Sabbath intention. And each week we look around the sanctuary at people who do not mind stating with their presence that they too appreciate these things. To be drawn to the temple for more than the holidays and the major observances is to make the big picture a priority, to ground ourselves in the tested structures of the past that we talked about last week, to prepare for whatever comes next in our lives. We worship together. We worship together in this place, to experience the Spirit together and in the quiet of our hearts. And we worship for no less a task than to share the inner motions of our souls, to feel the call of the divine in the thoughts and actions of fellow inhabitants of creation. Jacob Trapp tells us that to worship is to stand in awe under a heaven of stars, before a flower, a leaf in sunlight, or a grain of sand. It is an inarticulate silence yearning to speak. It is the window of the moments. The window of the moments open to the sky of the eternal. That is what draws us here. And that is what compels us to create a style and opportunities for worship that reflect not just where we have been and not just where we are right now, but also the world we want to bring into reality. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm not preaching for another 6 Sundays. But here in our shared sabbatical year, maybe we should use some of that time to work on the way we worship and ask ourselves how we are achieving this balance between old and new and now. For like Mary and Joseph, we understand the importance of those old foundations in the new thing that is beginning. Now, this doesn't mean doing anything rash. For timeless ritual, those abstract conversations and perceived inconveniences, that amateur singing and timely reflection is what draws us here and draws actually those others who occasionally darken our doors. What we do need to do is think about inclusion. Inclusion. From how clean we keep our ramp, to where we put the coffee pot, to how we preach, pray, and sing. People need to see new words in the old forms and a wider variety of faces in front of the sanctuary. They need to be met where they are, not commanded to conform to the pressures and perspectives of the past, even if we like them. This sabbatical year is a good time to experiment with these things. And we've already started. There are lay readers and guest preachers who change the sound and look of who we think a worship leader can be. We have even experimented a little bit with different forms and rituals too. But there's more to do. There is more to do. Because we, like Simeon, must open our ancient arms to new lights. Now, as you know, I'm a big fan of inclusive language, for example. And during my time away from leading worship, I will be looking at some of the words we still use in this place. How can we broaden the Lord's Prayer so that everyone can see themselves in God? How can we find and sing hymns that speak to our own experience? Or pray our prayers, responsive or otherwise, in a way that reflects our own broad theology? And we must also ask how we include people whose busy lives do not fit the time or form of this Sunday morning. So we need to be thinking once again about dinner church and Sabbath walks and pub theology, as well as service projects, large and small. And thinking about them while we try to understand or practice understanding that these activities are not add-ons that we do as well as worship, but forms of worship themselves that are just as valid. Now, Denise Levertov, in her poem, Primary Wonder, writes about being burdened by the worries and the cares of the world. But she ends saying, and then once more, the quiet mystery is present. Quiet mystery is present to me. The throng's clamor recedes. The mystery that there is anything at all, let alone cosmos, joy, memory, everything, rather than the void. In this postmodern world, we need to find ways to make steps into the temple that are easy to access for those who come after, so that they too can feel that mystery. So let's take a moment in silence now to think about those steps, where they make us stumble and where they make us dance.